Gina Han stepped off the transport shuttle and felt the weight of 100 hostile stares. The Galactic Coalition training facility on Vareth Prime stretched before her like a metal fortress, all sharp angles and cold surfaces. She adjusted the strap of her supply pack and walked forward with steady steps. Taman Park waited at the entrance gate. The security chief's face showed worry lines that hadn't been there in his file photos. He looked at Gina like she was walking toward her own funeral. "You can still refuse this assignment," Taman said quietly. "No one would blame you. 3 human instructors tried before you. All 3 left within days." Gina smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. "What happened to them?" "The cubs happened. Kravik younglings don't respect weakness. They see humans as prey animals. Soft, breakable." Taman glanced toward the training complex. "The last instructor spent 2 weeks in medical. The cubs didn't even touch him. They just made him understand what they could do if they wanted to." "I'm not leaving," Gina said. Taman sighed and led her inside. The facility hummed with activity. Alien species of every shape moved through the corridors. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4 or 6. Some had scales, others had fur or skin that shifted colors. But none of them looked at Gina with anything except curiosity or contempt. They reached the Kravik training hall. Through the observation window, Gina saw them for the first time. 12 cubs moved through combat drills with frightening grace. They stood on 2 powerful legs but could drop to 4 when speed mattered. Their bodies were covered in dark fur marked with gray and white patterns. Each cub was already twice Gina's size, their hands ending in retractable claws that gleamed under the lights. "That's Instructor Vexthor." Taman pointed to a massive Kravik adult supervising the cubs. Vexthor stood nearly 3 meters tall, his scarred muzzle twisted in a permanent snarl. "He doesn't believe humans belong here. He'll make that clear." Gina watched the cubs move. They fought in pairs, testing each other with strikes that would kill a human instantly. But she noticed something. They pulled their blows at the last second. They communicated with ear flicks and tail movements. They were teaching each other, not just fighting. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Taman stared at her like she'd gone mad. The next morning, Gina entered the training hall. All movement stopped. 12 pairs of yellow eyes fixed on her. The cubs' ears went flat against their skulls. Several dropped into hunting crouches. Vexthor's laugh was a deep rumble that shook the air. "So the Coalition sends another meat sack to waste our time." He circled Gina slowly, forcing her to turn to keep him in sight. "Look at you. No claws, no fangs. Weak eyes, weak nose. What can you possibly teach my cubs about combat?" Gina kept her voice calm. "I'm here to observe and assist Instructor Vexthor. I know I have much to learn about Kravik training methods." "Observe?" Vexthor moved closer, towering over her. His breath was hot on her face, smelling of raw meat. "You'll sit in the back like good prey and stay silent. If you disturb my training, I'll have you removed." "Understood?" "Understood," Gina said. She didn't look away from his eyes. Something flickered in Vexthor's expression. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. He turned back to the cubs. "Resume drills. Ignore the human. She's nothing." Gina walked to the rear observation row and sat down. From here she could see everything. The cubs returned to their training, but she felt their attention on her like physical weight. One cub, smaller than the others with distinctive white markings on his ears, kept glancing back at her between strikes. For 3 hours, Gina sat and watched. She didn't speak, didn't move except to breathe. When Vexthor demonstrated a combat technique that left a cub's defense open, she noticed but said nothing. When another cub favored his left side because of an old injury, she made a mental note. The days passed like this. Gina arrived before the cubs and sat in her rear row seat. She watched every drill, every lesson, every interaction. At night, she filled notebooks with observations about Kravik body language, pack dynamics, and teaching methods. The cubs began to test her. On the 4th day, the largest cub, Tor, deliberately threw a training dummy toward her head. Gina caught it without flinching and set it aside calmly. Tor's ears went up in surprise. On the 7th day, a cub named Krell approached her seat and snarled directly in her face, showing every fang. Gina met his eyes and stayed perfectly still. After a long moment, Krell huffed and walked away. But his tail wasn't aggressive anymore. Vexthor noticed these interactions and his mood grew darker. He began criticizing the cubs more harshly, pushing them harder. During weapon drills, he would call out, "Faster!" Or should we ask the weak human how to hold a blade? The cubs would train harder, But Gina noticed their ear flicks toward her carried a different meaning now. Not contempt, something else. After 2 weeks, Gina started speaking. Not to the cubs directly. She would murmur to herself during observation, analyzing techniques like she was recording notes. Interesting. That lateral movement creates an opening on the right side. Classical pack formation, strong but vulnerable to aerial assault. The first time she did this, Vexthor spun around, ready to roar at her. But Gina wasn't addressing anyone. She was simply thinking out loud. He couldn't punish that, but the cubs heard. And the next drill, one of them adjusted his stance to close that right side opening. Another cub modified the pack formation slightly. Vexthor noticed too, and his eyes narrowed at Gina with pure hatred. On the 15th day, Gina brought her lunch rations to the training hall. The facility was experiencing supply delays and everyone's portions were smaller. The cubs were hungry, snapping at each other with real irritation. During break time, Gina quietly divided her food into 13 portions. She ate one small piece and left the rest on a bench near the cubs' water station. She returned to her seat and watched. The cubs stared at the food, then at her. Tor, the pack leader, approached the bench slowly. He sniffed the food, looked at Gina, then made a low sound in his throat. The other cubs came forward and divided the portions among themselves. They ate while watching her. That night, when Gina returned to her quarters, she found something outside her door. A piece of synthetic meat from the cubs' training hunt. It was roughly torn, placed carefully on a clean cloth. A Kravik gift. Gina picked it up and smiled. She was beginning to understand. In Kravik culture, gifts meant something. They meant you saw someone, really saw them. The next morning, the small cub with white-marked ears, Rax, did something unprecedented. When Gina entered the training hall, he made a soft chirping sound. A greeting. Vexthor's roar shook the walls. Silence. She is not pack. But Rax's ears stayed up, and when Gina sat in her rear row seat, she noticed something new. The cubs had shifted their formation slightly during drills. Just enough so they could keep her in their peripheral vision. They were watching her now, just like she'd been watching them, and Vexthor saw it happening. 3 weeks had passed since Gina arrived at the facility. Other human instructors thought she was insane. Hyejin Choi, who taught a class of insectoid aliens down the corridor, pulled Gina aside one evening in the cafeteria. You need to assert dominance, Hyejin said, pushing her food tray aside. Predators only respect strength. You're being too passive, Gina smiled softly. Maybe, but the cubs are talking to me now. Talking? They're animals, Gina, dangerous ones. They're people, Gina corrected. Just different people. Hyejin shook her head and walked away, muttering about stubbornness getting humans killed. But Gina knew something was changing. Every morning now, when she entered the training hall, several cubs would make that soft chirping sound. Rax did it first, always, and then others would join. Vexthor would snarl and snap at them, forcing silence, but it happened every single day. During the 4th week, a cub named Sina injured her leg during combat practice. The wound wasn't deep, but it bled through her fur. Vexthor barely glanced at it, calling Sina weak for showing pain. The other instructors didn't care about minor injuries. They expected cubs to tough it out, but Gina had brought medical supplies. During the break, she approached Sina carefully, moving slowly so the cub could see her coming. Sina's ears went flat and she growled low. I know it hurts, Gina said quietly. She held up the medical kit. May I help? Sina stared at her. The other cubs had stopped drinking water and watched the interaction with intense focus. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Sina's ears lifted slightly. She extended her injured leg. Gina knelt and cleaned the wound with gentle efficiency. She applied synthetic skin that would help it heal faster. Sina's claws flexed but never extended toward Gina. When Gina finished, she patted Sina's shoulder once and returned to her seat. The cubs made no sound, but something had shifted in the air. Vexthor had watched the entire interaction with his lips pulled back from his fangs. That night, Gina found 3 gifts outside her door. Pieces of training equipment carefully placed. The cubs were bringing her things now. Gina started learning their language. Not the translated words they used with other species, but the real Kravik communication. She studied videos late into the night, practicing the rumbles and snarls and chirps. Her human throat couldn't make all the sounds perfectly, but she tried. On the 28th day, during a particularly difficult drill, Gina muttered something in basic Kravik. It was just a phrase meaning good pack work. She hadn't meant to say it loud enough for anyone to hear. Every cub in the hall froze. 12 heads turned toward her in perfect synchronization. Even Vexthor stood still, his eyes wide with shock. Then Tor, the pack leader, made a sound. A deep, approving rumble. Several other cubs echoed it. Vexthor's roar was immediate and furious. Back to drills now! But his hands shook with rage. A human had spoken Kravik. A prey animal had used the pack language. It was wrong. Unnatural. After that day, the cubs positioned themselves differently during training. They no longer kept their backs to Gina's observation seat. Instead, they arranged their formation so at least 2 cubs always had line of sight to her position. It was subtle, but Gina recognized it. A protective formation. They were including her in their awareness patterns. Gina began sharing stories during lunch breaks. She would eat her small ration and speak softly about human pack behavior. She told them about military units she'd served with, how human soldiers formed bonds that made them fight harder to protect each other. She described families, friends, the human need for belonging. The cubs would pretend not to listen, but their ears swiveled toward her voice. When she described her brother who died protecting his unit, several cubs made low mourning sounds. Vexthor tried to interrupt, to call the cubs back to training, but they wouldn't move until Gina finished her story. "You're corrupting them," Vexthor snarled at her one evening after the cubs had left. They were alone in the training hall, making them soft. "Weak like you." Gina looked up at the massive instructor. "I'm not making them anything. I'm just existing near them. They're starting to see you as pack. That's impossible. You're prey. Prey doesn't join predator packs." Vexthor's voice carried something that might have been fear underneath the anger. "If the High Command learns that I allowed this, my honor will be destroyed." "Then maybe honor needs a new definition," Gina said. Vexthor's claws extended fully. For a heartbeat, Gina thought he might attack her right there, but he turned and stormed out, the door slamming behind him hard enough to crack the frame. Taman found Gina in her quarters that night. Vexthor filed a formal complaint with the academy director. He says you're interfering with proper Kravik training. They're talking about terminating your contract. Gina nodded slowly. "I expected that. There's more. Director Wanshik Kang is coming personally to evaluate your performance. He's a politician, Gina. He cares about appearances and funding. If he sides with Vexthor, you're gone, and they might punish the cubs too for their behavior." "How would they punish them?" Taman's face went grim. "Separation from the pack. For Kravik, isolation is worse than death. They might split the cubs up, send them to different facilities." Gina's hands clenched into fists. "No, these cubs have done nothing wrong." "Then you need to prove your methods work. Soon." But Gina didn't know how to prove something that couldn't be measured in combat scores or drill times. The cubs were performing exactly as well as before. Better, maybe, because they worked together more smoothly. But that wasn't the kind of improvement that impressed bureaucrats. The next morning, Gina arrived to find Rax waiting outside the training hall. The young cub shifted his weight nervously, his white-marked ears flicking in distress. "Instructor Gina," he said in careful, accented human speech. "Vexthor planned something. I heard him speaking with other instructors. They will make you look foolish in front of the director." Gina knelt so she was closer to Rax's eye level. "Thank you for warning me, but I can handle Vexthor. He wants to hurt you." Rax's voice dropped to a whisper. "To prove humans are weak. If he hurts you, The cub's claws extended involuntarily. "The pack will not allow it." Gina felt her breath catch. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on Rax's shoulder. The cub's fur was coarse but warm. "Listen to me carefully. If anything happens, you must stay in formation. You must follow orders. Do you understand? Your future is more important than my pride." Rax's yellow eyes met hers. "You don't understand, Instructor. You're already pack. We protect pack." Before Gina could respond, the other cubs arrived for training. Rax quickly moved to join them, but he looked back at her once. His meaning was clear. Inside the training hall, Vexthor smiled at Gina with all his fangs showing. It wasn't a friendly expression. "I've arranged a special demonstration for Director Kang's visit tomorrow," he announced loudly. "A chance for you to show your teaching methods, human. I hope you're ready." Gina returned to her seat without answering, but her heart was beating too fast. She watched the cubs train, saw how they kept glancing at her, and understood that something bad was coming. That evening, all 12 cubs left gifts outside her door. Pieces of their training equipment, small trophies from their practice hunts, even a carefully woven band made from synthetic fibers. Pack gifts. Farewell gifts, maybe? Gina picked up each one and brought them inside. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in her quarters, surrounded by gifts from alien children who had decided she was worth protecting, and tried to figure out how to keep them safe from what was coming. Director Wonshik Kang arrived exactly on time, wearing an expensive suit and a politician's smile. He shook hands with various staff members, making small talk about budgets and success rates. Gina watched from the observation area as he entered the training hall with an entourage of officials and recording drones. "Ah, Instructor Han," Wonshik said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I've heard interesting reports about your methods. Instructor Vexthor has arranged a demonstration so we can properly evaluate your contribution to our facility." Gina stood. The cubs were arranged in formation across the hall, but their attention was locked on her. She could feel their tension from here. Tor's tail was completely still, which meant he was on high alert. Rax's ears were flat. Xena had shifted her weight forward onto her toes, ready to move. Vexthor stepped into the center of the hall. His armor gleamed under the lights, every piece of it designed to amplify his already intimidating size. Director Kang honored guests. "Today I will demonstrate proper Kravik combat instruction versus the humans' passive approach." "I haven't been teaching," Gina said quietly. "Just observing." "Exactly," Vexthor's smile was cruel. 42 days of observation with no actual instruction. Let's see if your presence has had any value at all." He gestured toward the combat circle. "Join me, Instructor Han. A simple demonstration. You'll show the director your human combat techniques, and I'll provide proper Kravik feedback." Taemin, standing near the entrance, started to protest. "This isn't standard evaluation protocol." The instructor volunteered. Vexthor interrupted. "Didn't you, human? Or are you too frightened to demonstrate your skills?" Gina looked at the cubs. Every single one of them was rigid with attention. She could see their muscles bunching under their fur. They knew this was a trap, but if she refused, Wonshik would use it as evidence that humans couldn't handle Kravik training. The cubs might be separated, their pack broken. "I'll demonstrate," Gina said. She walked to the combat circle, hearing the cubs' low growls behind her. Vexthor circled her slowly. "Standard combat forms to start. The human will attack, I will defend. Begin when ready." Gina knew basic combat. Every coalition instructor had to. She moved through the opening sequences, strikes and blocks that were designed to showcase technique rather than inflict damage. Vexthor countered each move with lazy efficiency, making it clear how much stronger he was. "Adequate," Vexthor announced to the watching crowd. "Now we'll increase difficulty." He didn't wait for agreement. His counterstrike came fast and hard, catching Gina in the ribs and sending her stumbling back. It was far beyond demonstration force. "In real combat," Vexthor said loudly, "an enemy shows no mercy to the weak." Gina regained her balance and raised her hands to continue, but her ribs ached where he'd struck. Through the pain, she heard the cubs. They were snarling now, a sound like distant thunder rolling through the hall. "Control your students." "Instructor Han," Wonshik called out nervously. "They're fine," Gina said, though she wasn't sure that was true. Continuing the demonstration, the next exchange was worse. Vexthor stopped pretending it was practice. His strikes came with full power, forcing Gina to dodge desperately. When she tried to counter, he caught her arm and twisted it painfully. "You see?" Vexthor addressed the director while still holding Gina. "Humans break easily. They have no place training warriors." The cubs' snarls grew louder. Gina saw Tor take a step forward, breaking formation. 2 other cubs followed. "Stand down," Gina gasped. "Stay in formation." "That's an order." The cubs froze, but they didn't step back. Their yellow eyes were locked on Vexthor with pure killing intent. Vexthor released Gina's arm and shoved her away. "Perhaps that's enough." "No," Gina interrupted. Her arm throbbed, but she straightened up. "You wanted a full demonstration. Let's finish it." Something flickered in Vexthor's eyes. Respect, maybe, or just surprise that she hadn't quit. But it hardened into anger. She'd challenged him in front of the director, in front of other Kravik. He couldn't let that stand. "As you wish," he growled. What happened next wasn't a demonstration. It was an assault. Vexthor moved with frightening speed, landing blow after blow. Gina tried to defend, but he was too strong, too fast. He disarmed her practice weapon and struck her across the face, drawing blood. "Stop this!" Taman shouted, moving toward the combat circle. But other instructors held him back. This was a sanctioned demonstration. Interfering would cause an interspecies incident. Gina's vision blurred. She could taste blood. Vexthor grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground, her feet dangling in the air. She clutched at his arm but couldn't break his grip. "You see, Director?" Vexthor's voice was triumphant. "Humans are prey. They will always be prey. Soft, weak, breakable things that don't belong among warriors." Gina couldn't breathe. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. But she could see the cubs. All 12 of them had moved forward, surrounding the combat circle. Their snarls had become roars. "Stand down," Gina managed to choke out. Vexthor slammed her against the wall. Her spine hit the metal with brutal force. "They won't listen to you. You're not Pack. You're nothing." He raised his other hand, claws fully extended. The killing strike. Through her fading consciousness, Gina saw those claws aiming for her throat. This wasn't demonstration anymore. This was murder. "You command nothing, human," Vexthor snarled. And then the cubs moved. 12 bodies hit Vexthor simultaneously. The impact knocked him away from Gina, who collapsed to the floor, gasping. The cubs moved like a single organism, every action perfectly coordinated. Rax went for Vexthor's weapon arm, his young jaws clamping down with crushing force. Tor struck at the throat, pulling the instructor off balance. Cena and Krell attacked the legs, bringing him down. The other cubs formed a defensive wall between Vexthor and Gina, their bodies shielding her from view. It happened so fast that the security team barely had time to react. Vexthor roared in pain and fury, trying to throw off the cubs, but they were everywhere. They tore at his armor, their claws finding every weak point. It wasn't random violence. This was a coordinated pack takedown, executed with deadly precision. Vexthor's blood spattered across the floor. His armor shredded under their assault. He tried to fight back, but 12 against 1 was impossible, even for an adult Kravik. The cubs were going to kill him. "Stop!" Wanchik's voice was high with panic. "Someone stop them!" Security teams rushed forward with stunners, but the cubs didn't even acknowledge them. They were locked into pack mode, protecting their elder from a threat. Gina dragged herself to her knees. Her throat was crushed, her ribs probably broken, but she forced air through her damaged vocal cords. She made a sound, not words, but a Kravik command. The phrase meant, "Halt, honor satisfied." It was barely audible over the chaos, but every cub heard it. They stopped instantly. 12 cubs stood over Vexthor's bleeding body, their muzzles red, their eyes wild, but they weren't moving. They'd frozen at Gina's command. The hall fell silent except for Vexthor's labored breathing and Gina's wheezing gasps. Slowly, carefully, the cubs backed away from Vexthor. They didn't break their defensive formation around Gina. Security teams rushed in to help the fallen instructor, while medical personnel ran toward Gina. But when they tried to approach her, the cubs snarled and blocked their path. "Let them help," Gina whispered. "I'm okay. Let them through." Only then did the cubs allow the medical team to reach her, but they didn't disperse. They stood guard while humans treated Gina's injuries, their eyes scanning for any new threats. Wanchik stared at the scene with his mouth open. Taman had gone pale. The other instructors were backing away slowly, suddenly aware that they were surrounded by young predators who had just nearly killed an adult. Director Kang found his voice. "What? What just happened?" Tor, the pack leader, spoke. His voice was thick with anger but perfectly controlled. "Pack protects pack, always." "She's not your pack," one of the Kravik officials said. "She's human, prey." All 12 cubs turned to look at him. Their eyes held the same cold certainty. "She is pack," Rax said simply. "We protect pack." And in that moment, watching those 12 fierce young faces staring down adults without fear, everyone in the hall understood. Something impossible had happened here. Something that would change everything. The medical bay was chaos. Doctors worked on both Gina and Vexthor in separate rooms, but the cubs refused to leave. They formed a living wall outside Gina's treatment area, ignoring every order to disperse. When security tried to force them out, they simply sat down and wouldn't move. 12 immovable masses of young predator, utterly focused on protecting their injured pack member. Taman finally convinced them to let him inside. He found Gina propped up in a medical bed, her throat wrapped in synthetic healing bandages, her ribs taped. She looked fragile and small, surrounded by all the equipment. "They're saying Vexthor might not survive," Taman said quietly. "His armor is destroyed. Multiple fractures, severe blood loss. The cubs were trying to kill him." Gina's voice was rough, barely a whisper. "He was trying to kill me first. I know, I saw." "Everyone saw?" Taman rubbed his face tiredly. "But that doesn't matter to the Coalition. The cubs attacked an Instructor. They're calling for them to be culled." "No." Gina tried to sit up and gasped in pain. "They were protecting me." "That's Kravik law. They're not your pack, Gina. Legally, you have no claim to them. And they nearly committed murder in front of dozens of witnesses, including the Academy director." Through the door, Gina could see the cubs. They were watching her with worried eyes. Rax had his ears flat against his skull. Tor's tail was wrapped around himself, a sign of deep distress. "I won't let them be punished," Gina said. "I'll testify. I'll explain. The Galactic Coalition is convening a tribunal tomorrow. They're bringing in judges from 3 different species to ensure fairness." Taman's voice was grim. "They're already talking about separating the cubs, sending them to different facilities across the galaxy. Breaking the pack." Gina closed her eyes. For Kravik, pack wasn't just family. It was identity, purpose, everything. Separating them would destroy who they were. "There has to be something we can do. Doyan Lee is flying in from Earth. He's a specialist in interspecies law. But even he says the evidence is bad. The cubs committed violence against a superior officer. There's video footage from every angle. Then we show them the full footage. Vexthor attacked me with lethal intent. The cubs were responding to a kill threat against their pack." "That's the problem," Taman said softly. "You're not their pack. You're their instructor. The law doesn't recognize what happened between you and those cubs as legitimate pack bonding. You're different species. That's not supposed to be possible." A knock at the door interrupted them. A Kravik official entered, her gray fur marked with symbols of high rank. She moved with the grace of someone who had survived many battles. Her eyes took in Gina's injuries, then looked through the door at the waiting cubs. "I am Elder Matriarch Kessera," she said. Her human speech was perfect, without accent. "I have come from the Kravik homeworld to oversee this situation." Gina straightened despite the pain. "Elder Matriarch, the cubs were defending—" "I know what they were doing," Kessera interrupted. "The question is why. Cubs do not defend non-pack members. It goes against every instinct. Yet these 12 attacked an adult Kravik to protect a human." She stepped closer, studying Gina with intense focus. "What did you do to them?" "Nothing. I just watched them train. For 42 days you sat in the rear observation position. You brought gifts. You shared food. You learned our language." Kessera's ears twitched forward. "You performed the old ritual. The watching before joining. Most Kravik don't even remember those traditions anymore." Gina shook her head. "I didn't know about any ritual. I was just trying to understand them before I tried to teach." "Exactly," Kessera said. A sound that might have been approval rumbled in her throat. "You acted on instinct, human pack bonding instinct, and it aligned perfectly with our ancient ways." She turned to look at the cubs again. "They accepted you. Truly accepted you. This hasn't happened with an alien species in 500 years. Can you save them?" Gina asked. "The tribunal wants to separate them. The tribunal wants to punish violence against authority. That's understandable. But Kravik law is clear. Pack defends pack from lethal threats. If you are truly packed to these cubs, then they acted within their rights." Kessera's eyes narrowed. "But you must prove it. Tomorrow at the tribunal, you must prove you are pack." After the elder matriarch left, Gina convinced the medical staff to let the cubs inside. They crowded into the room, trying to stay small and quiet despite their size. Rax approached the bed first, his white-marked ears trembling. "I'm okay," Gina said softly. "You saved me. We might lose you anyway," Tor said. The pack leader's voice was steady, but his eyes were afraid. "They're going to separate us. Send us away from each other. From you. I won't let that happen." "How can you stop it?" Sina asked. "You're just one human." Gina looked at each of them. 12 young faces that had become precious to her. "Because you're my pack, and pack protects pack. Always." The next day, the tribunal convened in the facility's main conference hall. 3 judges sat at the elevated platform. A Kravik elder, a human diplomat, and a crystalline being whose species prized logic above all else. The room was filled with officials, instructors, and observers from a dozen different species. Gina walked in with Doyen Lee, the human lawyer who had arrived from Earth overnight. The cubs were held in a separate chamber under guard. Vexthor was still in medical, but had submitted a recorded testimony demanding the cubs be culled for attacking him. Director Wanshik testified first, describing the attack in clinical detail. The security footage played on every screen, showing the cubs' coordinated assault. It looked brutal, savage. The evidence of violence was undeniable. The cubs acted with clear intent to kill, Wanshik concluded. They're a danger to staff and students. They must be separated and re-educated individually. The human judge nodded, harsh but perhaps necessary. Then Doyen Lee stood up. I'd like to call a witness. Elder Matriarch Kessera of the Kravik High Command. The matriarch entered and took her position. Every Kravik in the room immediately showed signs of respect, ears up, tails still. Elder Matriarch, Doyen said, can you explain Kravik pack law regarding defense of pack members? Pack law is absolute, Kessera said. If a pack member faces lethal threat, all pack members respond with lethal force. This is not optional. It's instinct encoded in our species for millions of years. And if someone attacks a pack member, what happens? The pack destroys the threat completely without hesitation. The crystalline judge's light pulsed. But Instructor Han is human. How can she be packed to Kravik cubs? That's the remarkable part, Kessera said. She performed the ancient ritual without knowing it existed. The watching before joining. In old Kravik culture, when a new wolf wanted to join a pack, they would sit at the edge and observe. They would bring gifts, share food, prove their value through patience, not dominance. She pulled up historical records on the screens, ancient Kravik texts describing the ritual in detail. Modern Kravik have forgotten this. We force pack bonds through combat and dominance trials, but this human, she instinctively returned to our oldest and truest method. But she's still a different species, the human judge said. How can pack bonds cross that barrier? Because pack is not about species, Kessera said firmly. It's about trust, sacrifice, and mutual protection. This human sat in the subordinate position for 42 days. She observed without demanding. She gave without expecting return. She learned our language and our ways, and when tested by the cubs, she never showed fear or aggression. She showed patience. Doyen pulled up more footage. Not from the attack, but from the previous weeks. Gina sitting quietly in her observation seat. Gina treating Sina's wound. Gina sharing her food with the hungry cubs. The cubs accepted her, Kessera continued. They brought gifts. They adjusted their behavior based on her observations. They protected her with their bodies even when ordered to train. By every measure of Kravik law, Instructor Han is packed to these cubs. Then why did Vexthor attack her? The crystalline judge asked. Because he feared it, Kessera said. He feared that a prey species could be accepted where he, a proud Kravik warrior, never truly bonded with those cubs. His pride couldn't accept being shown up by a human. They called Gina to testify. She spoke about each cub individually, describing their personalities, their strengths, their fears. She explained how pack bonds formed through trust and time, not force and dominance. She showed recordings of her notebook observations proving she'd studied them seriously. These cubs didn't attack randomly, Gina said. They responded to a genuine threat against their pack member. That's Vexthor. Me. They were following the most basic law of their species. How can we punish them for being what they are? Finally, they brought in the cubs themselves. 12 young Kravik filed into the hall and stood before the judges. They looked scared but defiant. Cub Tor, the Kravik judge said. Why did you attack Instructor Vexthor? He was killing our pack elder, Tor said simply. Pack protects pack. Instructor Han is not Kravik. She is pack, all 12 cubs said in unison. The tribunal chambers fell silent. The judges conferred quietly among themselves. Finally, the Kravik judge spoke. This tribunal recognizes that Instructor Gina Han has been accepted into the pack through ancient Kravik bonding rituals. The cubs acted within their rights to defend a pack member from lethal threat. 3 months after the tribunal, Gina stood in a completely different training hall. This one was twice the size of the old facility, with observation areas designed for multiple species. The walls displayed the Coalition's new emblem, a circle of different species standing together. At the center was a human hand and a Kravik paw overlapped. Instructor Han, Taman called from the doorway. He smiled, something he did much more often these days. Your new class is ready. Gina walked to the main hall and found 30 instructors waiting. Humans, yes, but also Kravik, insectoid Vrel, serpentine Satha, and half a dozen other species. All of them had volunteered to learn the new interspecies integration methods. Behind Gina, 12 young Kravik entered in perfect formation. They were taller now, stronger, their cub features maturing into adult proportions, but they stayed close to Gina, their pack elder, just as they had for the past 3 months. "Welcome," Gina said to the gathered instructors. "You're here to learn something the Coalition thought was impossible. How to form genuine bonds across species barriers, how to turn fear and prejudice into trust and family." Rack stepped forward, his white-marked ears high with confidence. "We're here to show you it works, because we are proof." The training program was intense. Gina taught the observation method, the importance of patience over dominance. She explained pack dynamics from both human and Kravik perspectives. The instructors practiced reading body language across species, learning to communicate beyond words. But the real breakthroughs came when the cubs demonstrated. They showed how they'd accepted Gina step by step. They explained what her actions meant in Kravik culture. They were patient with the struggling instructors, encouraging them when they made mistakes. "I still don't understand," a Vrel instructor said one day. Her insectoid features made her expressions hard to read, but her voice carried frustration. "My students keep attacking each other. They don't trust me." Sina approached the Vrel carefully. "Are you sitting with them? Or standing above them?" "I stand. I'm the instructor. I need to show authority." "That's your mistake," Sina said gently. Instructor Gina sat in the back row. She made herself small, non-threatening. She showed us she was willing to learn before teaching. The Vrel instructor looked skeptical. "But I'm smaller than my students already. If I make myself seem weaker—" "It's not about weak or strong," Tor interrupted. "It's about respect." Instructor Gina respected us enough to learn our ways first. That made us want to learn from her. The Vrel instructor tried the method. 2 weeks later, she reported that 3 of her most aggressive students had brought her gifts. Real gifts, not just appeasement. She was crying when she told Gina. A strange sight with compound eyes, but the emotion was clear. "They accepted me," the Vrel whispered. "I have a pack." Word spread through the Coalition. Other facilities requested Gina's training program. More instructors arrived representing species that had never successfully trained predator students. The success rate was remarkable. Not perfect, some bonds didn't form, some species remained incompatible, but far better than anyone had predicted. Yejin Choi, the instructor who'd once told Gina she was too passive, came to observe a class. She watched Gina work with a mixed group of cubs from 3 different predator species, all learning to cooperate despite their instincts. "I was wrong," Hyejin said during the lunch break. "I told you to dominate them." "But this is better, stronger. It's just understanding," Gina said. "Every species has its own version of pack or family or tribe. We just need to learn the language." Minji Seo, a human psychologist, arrived to study the phenomenon. She spent weeks interviewing Gina, the cubs, and the other successful pack bonds that had formed. Her research paper, Pack Bonding Across Species, the Han Method, became required reading at every Coalition training facility. "What you've discovered," Minji explained to Gina, "is that humans have an almost supernatural ability to integrate into social structures. We're not the strongest or fastest or smartest, but we can join almost any group and make them better through empathy and cooperation." "I just treated them with respect," Gina said. "That's the point. Most species can't do that naturally with aliens. They see other and stop there. But humans see other and immediately start looking for common ground. It's what made us successful on Earth, and now it's making us valuable to the entire galaxy." The Cubs' graduation was a major event. Elder Matriarch Kessera came personally from the Kravik homeworld. Other species sent representatives. The ceremony was broadcast across Coalition space. All 12 Cubs stood in formation, wearing gleaming armor marked with both Kravik symbols and the new interspecies integration emblem. They were warriors now, fully trained and deadly, but when Gina approached to present their certifications, they all dropped to one knee in respect. "Stand up," Gina said softly. "You're not beneath me." "No," Tor said. "We're beside you. Always." They rose and each cub received their certification. But instead of being assigned to different Kravik military units as tradition demanded, they had made a request. All 12 wanted to stay together. Stay with Gina. The coalition approved the request and created something new. The first mixed-species special operations team. 12 Kravik warriors and 1 human coordinator, working together to handle situations that required both combat expertise and cultural sensitivity. Their first mission came 2 weeks after graduation. A mining colony had been taken hostage by raiders. 3 different species were trapped inside, and traditional military assault would likely kill the hostages. The colony requested a team that could negotiate and fight if necessary. Gina and her pack arrived on the transport ship. They spent 2 days observing the situation, learning the raiders' patterns. Gina identified the raiders' leader through careful study of their group dynamics. Then she walked into the colony alone with her pack positioned nearby. "I want to negotiate," she told the raider leader. The negotiation took 6 hours. Gina offered the raiders safe passage in exchange for the hostages. But she also took time to understand why they'd turned to raiding in the first place. They were refugees desperate and angry, seeing violence as their only option. "There are other options," Gina said. "The coalition needs people like you, warriors with skills. Join us instead of fighting us," the raider leader laughed. "And be someone's trained pet? Like your Kravik?" Before Gina could respond, Tor stepped into the room. Then Rak, Sina, Krill, all 12 cubs entering in formation. They surrounded Gina, their presence making the temperature in the room drop. "We're not pets," Tor said quietly. "We're pack." "There's a difference." The raider leader studied them, seeing how they moved together, seeing the genuine respect between the human and the predators. "That's real? Not just coalition propaganda?" "It's real," Gina said. "And it can be real for you too." Pack is built, not forced. The mission ended peacefully. The hostages were released. Half the raiders accepted recruitment into coalition service. The other half took the offer of safe passage and left. No one died. After that, the request never stopped. Gina and her pack handled diplomatic missions, hostage situations, interspecies conflicts. They were good at it because they represented something new. Proof that different species could genuinely work together. 5 years passed. Gina's training program had expanded to 20 facilities across coalition space. Hundreds of instructors had learned the integration method. Thousands of pack bonds had formed between species that were supposed to be incompatible. The cubs, not really cubs anymore, but she still called them that, had become famous. Young Kravik from across the homeworld wanted to train with the pack that accepted prey. Other predator species started requesting interspecies training. The old hierarchies were breaking down, slowly but steadily. Gina stood in her office at Coalition headquarters looking at the reports. The success rates kept improving. The galaxy was changing because one human had sat in a back row and watched patiently, instead of demanding respect. Rax entered the office carrying data pads. He was almost fully grown now. Massive and powerful, his white-marked ears still distinctive. "The council wants to speak with you. They're proposing something big." Gina followed him to the council chambers. The 12 representatives of the major coalition species all stood when she entered. That was new. "Respect from the highest levels, Instructor Han," the council leader said. "We've been reviewing the results of your integration program. The data is remarkable. Interspecies cooperation has increased 40% in facilities using your methods. Violent incidents are down 60%, and pack bonding has been successfully documented across 200 species combinations." "That's good news," Gina said carefully. "We want to expand the program, make it mandatory for all coalition facilities. We're creating a new department, Interspecies Integration and Cooperation. We want you to lead it." Gina looked at her pack. All 12 cubs stood behind her, as they always did. They'd grown up together, fought together, changed the galaxy together. They were her family. "I'll do it," she said, "on one condition. My pack stays together. We work as a team always." "Of course," the council leader said. "That's exactly what we're counting on." The meeting ended and Gina walked out with her pack surrounding her. They moved through the headquarters corridors and everyone,